Well, hey, good morning. My name is Josh, and I'm so glad that you're joining us. And as I get up here, I really do. I feel like it's my privilege to be hanging out with y'all this morning, braving the weather, all these things. Now, last week I made a note talking about Christmas. If you were here, I stand strong on Christmas has its time, and Thanksgiving also has its time. During Thanksgiving week, season, whatever you want to call it, there should be an allotment of specific Thanksgiving stuff, and then we can move to Christmas. Then we can hang up our lights, then all the trees. Christmas music starts December 1st. We're a day early, but whatever. So we're moving into the Christmas season, and what better way to start the Christmas season than starting a series, Sinners Like Me? Makes us all feel good, right? Christmas season, we're talking about sinners, and you might be like, why on earth are we talking about sinners like me or like us? Like that doesn't bring in the good news of Christmas. But I'd imagine that for many of us sitting in our chairs today and as we walk about our normal lives, that this might be something that we have in common. And it might just be the reason that the Christmas season is as good as it is. It might just be because we're sinners, and we'll circle back around to that in a second. We're talking about this series, and we're looking through a few names and few stories individually, because I'd imagine whether you've been coming to church for a long time, whether you're coming back to church, maybe you're just checking us out and visiting for the very first time, and you don't know what to think about church. When you think of the Bible, or you think of Bible stories, you might have a picture that might not be entirely the whole story. Now, what I mean by that is the best way that I can talk about it is talking about my kids. So we read to our kids most nights of the week, and a lot of them are Bible stories. And maybe you've heard of some of these Bible stories. One that we read often is Noah and the Ark. And Kelly, our oldest son, loves Noah and the Ark. And the two animals march on the big boat, and they float on the water, and then there's a rainbow at the end, and he's like, yeah, this is great. I love seeing the elephants, and I love seeing the giraffes and the monkeys and all the things, and that's awesome. But every once in a while, if my wife Des is in the room, we'll be reading through this book, and I just like to add the caveat, the thing that isn't so nice and neat and fine. It's like, yeah, we have two of every animal, and Noah built the ark. And the rains came and the floods came and everybody on the earth died because God was doing a reset. And Kelly's like, huh? What? What's going on? And Des and I laugh a little bit, but that's the actual story. Now, if we're reading that book to our kids, we don't need to include the part when the rains came, everybody but Noah's family, as the story goes, died. We don't need, because it's not appropriate for them. They're not ready to handle that. However, for us in our adult lives, if we take on the posture of carrying the storybook mode of reading the Bible into our adult lives, we start to sanitize it and clean it up and make it look all nice and pretty. And the Bible is just a book of fun, fantastical stories. But it introduces a tension if we do carry that. The tension is, here is this book of really cool, fun things that we can look at and see the stories and, oh, that's awesome, and God is amazing, cool. But that's not how our lives go, because our lives are a little messy, and our lives are a little broken, and they can be hard and challenging. And it's not all bad, but it can be bad. And there's a dividing line between this book of stories that is awesome and our real life, and it's hard to connect the two. And we want to take a second to incorporate, what if we read the Bible as it was intended? Not as sometimes we get caught up in, not as the book of fantasy stories, not as the book of, this is just part of it, but not the book of the rules that says do this or don't do this, don't do this. The guidebook for our life, what if we didn't read it in those ways? Those are surely parts of it, but I don't think that's how the Bible was meant to be read. What if we read it as it was intended? Rough, gritty, harsh sometimes, but seeing redemption in the midst of it. What if we started reading that and we said, okay, we're not excluding ourselves from this story because we can see people just like us in the midst of the Bible? What if we read the Bible as if it were history? Because I believe that's kind of what it is. I think it's a documentation of ancient cultures moving throughout time, and maybe a better way to put a fun twist on history is his story. It's the story of God. It's a story of people walking through their lives and God intersecting in those lives. And when we look at it through that lens as a narrative, it can be rough, and it can be hard, and it can be broken. But God is still weaving in and out of our story. It's ancient history with a divine purpose. That as we look at people, when we look at people's lives 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, when we look at our lives today, we can see the through line of how God is working, even in the midst of really hard, even in the midst of that's super challenging. That I don't know if I can fully believe that, but I see it in my life and I can relate to that. And maybe you're in that boat. Maybe you're in the boat of, I can't get on with all of the divine and the inspiration and the supernatural, all those big things. Maybe you struggle with that. But if you were to look at some of the stories in the Bible as they actually are, as they actually read, that you might be able to say, I might not believe in that supernatural, but I believe in what that person said. And I believe in what this group went through. And I believe in what they experienced, because that's a little bit like my life. That's a little bit what I experienced. And that's a little bit, I think, what we can all relate to when we look at some of the harsh things that are incorporated in the Bible. And for us, as we move forward and we move through this, we look at the narrative. I just want you to know that if you feel like this is tough or this is hard to grasp, that's really okay. We just want to introduce this idea to you that it's not all picture perfect, and Christianity isn't all picture perfect. As we look at the New Testament, we see some of the documents that go into this. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John write what we call the Gospels in the New Testament. The Gospels are a life account of Jesus. And these guys are writing this down, and it's no wonder why we can call these the Gospels. Gospels literally translates to good news. And what I love about the good news is you can't have good without bad. You can't have easy without hard. You have to have some sort of a comparison. So as they're bringing about these gospels, this good news into the world, they're comparing it to something that came before. And one of those guys is Matthew, and he documents the first book of the New Testament. He's writing all this stuff down, and he's trying to explain to us this grander story, this big story of good news that's coming in. And if you're like, hey, I've been to church, I left church, I'm coming back to church, but what I heard from Christians wasn't good news, I would invite you to maybe just ask the question, was the good news that was told to me actually the news that was meant to be told? Was I given an improper form of the good news? Was that good news revolving around rules, big, fantastic stories? Or was that good news surrounded by a person? And all of this good news is wrapped up into this simple story, a compelling story that leads us in our walk of faith if you call yourself a Christian. The story it simply goes like this. Humans in this world, we messed up. We kind of broke everything. We broke the system. We stepped in and we created problems because we wanted to rebel from God. We sinned. And it's something that we all have in common. Sin is just this basic idea that we're stepping away from our intended purpose in our life, and we have consequences because of that. But in the midst of our sin, God steps in and he says, I'm going to start helping. I'm going to start working. I'm going to start bringing this back. And when all the stars aligned, when the time was right, when this nation that God was walking alongside got to the perfect place, a child was born. And God, for years and years and years, said, I'm walking in your kingdom, the kingdoms of earth, the kingdoms of man. I'm incorporating myself, and I'm trying to help along the way. But at some point, he's like, I'm going to introduce a new kingdom, not of this world, not of anything that you guys know about. And at the top of that kingdom, at the pinnacle of that kingdom, is a child, is my son, is God becoming flesh, the Word becoming flesh and walking amongst us, talking amongst us. He is with us. And he loved us, and he taught us, and he died for us. And this child is leading the way of bringing in this new way, this new kingdom that is great news. So as Matthew is looking at this, and Matthew's writing this book, the Gospel of Matthew, years after Jesus came and he died and he rose, then he left this earth. Matthew's writing this and he's saying, this can't be a story just for me. I've experienced Jesus. I've experienced all the great things that come along with Jesus, but this can't just stick with me. I have to get a crew together. I have to write this down to make sure everyone knows what Jesus is all about, what he stood for, and where he's leading us. And if we were Matthew, we would start with the birth. We would start, this is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph. This is where we would start, the birth of Jesus, if we're explaining the story of Jesus. But Matthew said, hold on, wait 1 second. We need to give a little bit of backstory to get to where we are now, because we can't have good news without knowing where we've been. So he introduces a genealogy. And this is the part of the New Testament that I've instructed a lot of people. It's like, hey, go and read Matthew, but get through it. Like, it is not fun. It is not enjoyable. It's a list of names. Get through it. It gets so much better. But Matthew is like, we need to pause because we're stepping into this realm of Jesus. But I think it's important to look at where we've been and not glance over the important people that have led up to this, not get to Jesus without seeing where he's been. So he talks about some of these main people, Abraham, David, Joseph. This is Joseph, his father, and how the lineage works its way down from Abraham to David. And David's important because if God was introducing his final king in Israel, they believed that the king had to come from the lineage of kings. So if Jesus came from the line of David, it immediately got the Jewish audience's respect. They were automatically locked in. They're like, okay, we're in for this. We see this significance. Let us know. But for us, it's like, why? Why do we need to know this? It's a little boring. It's not very fun, but I think it helps us get to Jesus. So this is where Matthew starts. He says, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah. Now he starts off strong with this word Messiah. Messiah means chosen one, God's chosen one. The Savior, it's a big deal. And again, everyone would have read that in the time and been like, okay, you have my attention. And he starts in and he's like, okay, here are the names. Here's where we go. He says, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Got it. We got these big characters out of the way. These are important people. And then he goes back, starts from the beginning. He says, Abraham was the father of Isaac. And now, if we had time to go through all of these names, we would. But there's a lot of narrative that goes with each of them. So we glance over some of these big characters, and we stumble upon some other characters that inform us of where we're heading with this series. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. And right there, we pause. We pause because Judah is one of 12 sons of Jacob. And if we were picking out someone to be in the lineage of Jesus, Judah would not be the person that we would choose. Judah, one of the 12 brothers, was the one who threw his brother in a pit. And then he sold his brother into slavery. If we were to pick someone to be in the lineage of Jesus, we would pick Joseph. Joseph was respected. He was a loved child. He eventually stepped into leadership and led with integrity over a whole nation. He was entrusted with a lot. And we would think, well, Joseph, he's the obvious person for Jesus to come from. He's the obvious person that he reflects Jesus, so we should take our lead. But in this narrative, it's like Jesus comes from Judah. And it doesn't stop there. Judah, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. And it's like, pause. These people well known back then, maybe not to us, and that's why we're talking about it today. This would have raised a giant red flag for everyone in the audience because they'd have been like, hold on a second. Judah and Tamar, Perez and Zerah, why are you including them? Because we know that there is a giant scandal around this. This is like talking about Thanksgiving week, and you're telling them about your family, and you share all the good stories, but then there's Cousin Eddie over here who says stupid stuff and maybe talks about things that are irrelevant. He might be mean, he might just be silly, but we don't bring up Cousin Eddie in this. Why are you bringing up Cousin Eddie? Because they don't carry a good story. They don't carry a good narrative. This is not the kind of stuff that we would think lead in to Jesus. But Matthew said, we're not skipping over this. This is a story that maybe we've never heard before because it's not one that goes in Sunday school. It's not back in our kids' services. We don't read this for fun. But Matthew said, we can't skip over this because this is part of the story. And because Matthew didn't skip over it, neither are we. So the story of Judah and Tamar, it goes like this. Judah, one of Jacob's 12 sons, he leaves the pack for a little while, and he meets a woman from Canaan, a Canaanite woman. And right off the bat, this is strike one, because it was not right in the eyes of their culture and their law to marry someone outside of their nation. So he goes and marries a Canaanite woman, and this is frowned upon, and there's consequences that come to that. With that, there are three children that are born from that relationship. And we see the oldest, once he grows up, it's time for Judah to find a wife for his oldest. And this is what it says in Genesis. Judah got a wife for his oldest son. What a strange name for his firstborn. And her name was Tamar. So Judah got a wife. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death. Not something that we're used to. And I can't explain this entirely other than the fact that the Old Testament and the way that God interacted with people was many times different and harsh compared to what we experience today. So because of his wickedness, he was slain, he was put to death, and now Tamar is a widow. And in this time, what was family culture is if a son or a brother passed away, there was a responsibility put on the older brother, the younger brother, to step into his place. And so this is how the story goes on. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty. As my youth pastor once told me, sleeping with someone is not just going to bed and closing your eyes with someone. Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. This is a strange thing that in our culture, but it's something that was very common. The brother would take the place of his older brother. He would engage in relations with his wife to have a family in honor of the deceased brother. But Onan's like, I'm not doing that. I'm not stepping in because why would I give my brother the honor, the glory of having a family? So he backed out. And God did the same thing with Onan that he did with He struck him down because of his wickedness. And Tamar, again, is left on her own, alone without a spouse. She's a widow. Now, there's a third son, but the third son, he was young at the time. So when all this is going down, the third son is a child, so he wasn't going to step into this relationship because he wasn't old enough. So Judah told Tamar, he said, Tamar, when he's old enough, I will introduce you to, you guys will get together and fulfill the law, the culture that we do. Well, time went by and Tamar went back to live in her father's household, and Judah goes off and lives in his household. And time passes, and Tamar starts to realize, I I'm getting this third brother because he's of age and Judah hasn't reached out. Judah hasn't called me. Judah hasn't done anything. I don't think this is happening. So years have gone by and this doesn't come to fruition. Well, we read that Judah's wife, the Canaanite woman, she eventually passes away. And after a time of mourning that Judah goes through, it says he's going to go up the road to a nearby village to take care of his sheep. So he's about to walk up and Tamar hears words of this. This is most likely years down the road. They haven't seen each other in a long time. And Tamar takes off her widow's garments and puts on the garments of a prostitute. And she puts a veil over her face so her face can't be recognized. And she goes and plants herself right on the road between where Judah lived and where Judah was going to set him up, so to speak. So Judah goes and he gets up and he goes and he's going to go take care of his sheep. And he encounters a prostitute on the road. And he approaches her and they talk and he doesn't recognize her because it had been a long time. I don't quite understand that veil had to be super thick, but he didn't recognize her. And he says to the prostitute, "Come now, let me sleep with you." And right there, it's like, we are in the thick of it. First, we've married outside of our nation. Now we've had wickedness in sons that has led to them dying. And now there is a relationship between a father and a daughter-in-law, and it's weird, and it's, again, it's gritty, and it's rough. And Tamar looks at Judah, unknowing to him that that's who it is. And Tamar says, "Okay, I will, but I need a payment. I need you to give me something." So Judah says, well, I'll give you one of my lambs. That'll be my payment. I'll pass that on to you. She says, "Great, I'll accept that. But I need some form of insurance because you clearly don't have any lambs here. So I need some form of insurance." And Judah says, "Okay, so here is my staff, and here is my signet," which is like a necklace with a cord on it. But what's interesting about these two things that he says, "I will give you these, I will give you these as insurance," was that these were specific to him. This wasn't just a stick. This wasn't just a necklace. There were specific identifiers to Judah. So she accepts, takes those insurance from him. They sleep together and they go on their way. And Judah goes up and takes care of his sheep. And Tamar goes back to her father's household and puts back on her widow's garments. And then it says, 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution. And as a result, she is now pregnant." And I laugh at this because it's fully natural. There's not a pregnancy test that she's taking. It's just she starts showing, it's like, uh-oh, she's gotten into a little bit of trouble. She's gotten into some risky business. And Judah, remember, this is Judah who threw his brother in a pit, sold him into slavery. Judah, who has done some shaky, not great things, takes on this posture of righteousness. And he's like, "Oh, this isn't good. I have to do something about it." It says, Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." At which point, I just have to say again, Merry Christmas. This is our Christmas story that Matthew is saying, we can't miss this. And that's why he included it. Have her burned to death. And Judah's like, "Oh yeah, we need to have retribution for this. She is wrong. She slept outside of our family, and that's not how we do things. That's not how we do things." So he calls her out, and Tamar is not dumb. She knew what she was doing. She had a plan. She did not come unprepared. It says, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. She had a message for Judah. This is the message that she had because she's prepared. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." And the gifts or the insurance was handed back. And I just imagine Judah wide-eyed, like, "Oh no, what have I done?" And the pieces start coming together. And he gets his staff back and he realizes that prostitute, that he went back and tried to find and couldn't find. And she's like, where did it go? Was his daughter-in-law. And he found himself in a mess, and he dropped the charges against her immediately. And I just imagine Matthew writing this down, including Judah and Tamar and their children. It's like, we can't skip over this. We have to include this. So going back to the genealogy that Matthew was talking about, Judah, the father of Perez, and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron, Hezron, the father of Ram, Ram, the father of Amminadab. And Matthew's like, we can't skip this. Because if we do, there's a disconnect from real life and from where we're at. And not only that, as we look at the story, the sinners that are Judah and Tamar, I don't think there's any question. And wherever you're at, that some of those acts, many of those acts, are not good, are hurtful, are sinful, that lead to consequences. I think we can all agree that some of those things were heinous. They weren't good. But if we leave those parts out, there's a disconnect between us and the stories in the Bible and the good news that Jesus offers. And Matthew, more than anyone, got this. Matthew, more than anyone, was writing this down because he felt this. Matthew felt that God went out of his way to use the worst of the worst to introduce the best of the best. And Matthew had the reputation to back this up because Matthew, as he's documenting this later in his life, was the worst of the worst. Nobody had to guess where Matthew stood. People saw Matthew as a tax collector, as someone who was a thief, someone who was dishonest, someone who hurt individuals, someone who hurt families. He stole from them. Everybody knew what Matthew was about. And when he encountered Jesus in the middle of the book of Matthew, when it talks about the encounter between Jesus and Matthew, Matthew expected Jesus to react and respond the same way that everyone else in his life did. Matthew, you don't belong. Matthew, because of your past, you're not welcome here. Matthew, you are not good enough to be in my presence. That's what we'd expect. That's what Matthew expected. But as he looked into Jesus' eyes, I imagine that he saw love, he saw compassion, he saw arms wide open. Matthew, come follow me. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what you've done. Come follow me. And Matthew thought, well, no. I'm not good enough beforehand. But Jesus, when he met him there, Matthew's like, this guy is not just some picture perfect dude. They got everything right. That comes from everything that's right. Jesus did get everything right, but he didn't come from everything that was right. But he came to redeem it. And Matthew said, okay, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to get up and follow you, and I'm going to trust in what you say, and I'm going to trust in this invitation. I'm going to trust that this is good for me. And Matthew, again, writing this down, something stuck with him right after this encounter because he went and sat with Jesus and some other tax collectors and some other sinners and then some other people who considered themselves righteous. And Jesus said to Matthew, and this stuck, he said, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. I have come to call sinners like you, Matthew. I have come to call sinners like you, Judah and Tamar. I have come to call sinners like me and like you. Matthew's like, we gotta get this right. All of the people in that room, all of the people sitting with Jesus that thought they were righteous, that thought they were good, Matthew wanted everyone to understand that everyone and anyone that Jesus called to follow him are sinners like me. Jesus always invited sinners in because we all come from that place of brokenness. And I imagine as Matthew's writing this down and believes that, hey, this is bigger than me, it's going to be shared with people that stretches across the earth, that he would encourage us and tell us, we have two things in common. The first one is that you're a sinner, and I'm a sinner, and Matthew's a sinner, and Judah and Tamar, we're sinners. But also, that you're invited. That amidst our brokenness, the good news is that Jesus invited us in despite our mess, despite our brokenness. He invited us in and said, come follow me. And what Matthew knew and what Jesus knew is that when we decide to say that my way is not the best way, the way that I've been doing life on my own has never been fulfilling, never been abundant, like Jesus offers abundant life. When we are willing to acknowledge that and admit that, we humbly place ourselves in a position of need for a Savior and for a King. And we can submit ourselves to saying, God, your way is best, and you're inviting me into this. And if you choose to follow him, you will change. You will start to express some of those things that Matthew saw in Jesus. The love, the compassion, the arms wide open. You will start to produce peace and joy in your life beyond your understanding. But not only that, not only will you be changed, people around you will be changed because of your change. Your spouse, your kids, your friends, your employer, your employees, they will start to notice there's something different about him. There's something different about her, that despite where they've come from, we're seeing something that is amazing and impactful for others, for the world around us. And that's Jesus' invitation to every single one of us, to sinners like me, to sinners like you. You're a sinner, I'm a sinner, but we're all invited. And Matthew gives us this story, tells us of this story, but he's just getting started. He has a lot more in store to let us know how we connect with this lineage of Jesus and why that brings about the good news. We'll talk more about that next week in part 2 of Sinners Like Me. I'd love to pray for you before we go. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for the gift of grace that you give us. Thank you for your love and your posture of arms wide open, welcoming us in, even when we don't feel like we deserve it, and even when we feel like we don't belong or we're not good enough. Jesus, through Matthew's story and Judah and Tamar, we see that you bring about good and light despite the sin in our lives. And God, I pray that we would embrace that today, that we'd walk out of this place deciding with everything that we do to follow you. God, we're grateful for you. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. We're going to sing one more song, so I want to invite you to stand and let's sing together.